work of record. They are on the ballot: Harry Brown, John Hagelin, and Howard Phillips. How far will they get? And how far have they come? Third-party presidential candidates of Campaign 96. Friday morning, live on Washington Journal.
And now from Philadelphia, Ross Perot at the University of Pennsylvania. This event lasts an hour.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the University of Pennsylvania here in the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia. Will you please rise as Susan Coleman sings our national anthem? She is accompanied by Kevin Chun.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proud lad we hail as the twilight's less gleaming, whose broad stripes and the bright stars through the perilous fight while the ramparts we watch were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave? And the land of the free and the home of the free.
Thank you, Susan. Will you please join me in welcoming our guests this evening, Scott Cush and the new Sigma Nu Medical Fraternity, our student sponsors for the event, Group Therapy, who provided our pre-event entertainment, and U.S. congressional candidate Joe McClugan, who is a Republican challenger in the Philadelphia's 3rd District. Mr. McClugan has been endorsed by the Reform Party. And now I would like to introduce to you the man who has stirred inside me the great responsibility and privilege I have to participate in a democracy. A man who exemplifies the moral character, commitment to excellence, and goodwill we should expect from our leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, the next President of the United States, Ross Perot.
Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Great to be with you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. You're very kind to come tonight. Thank you. Thank you. It's a privilege to be with you. Thank you for coming. We're going to be talking about serious problems tonight. This will be a very different speech than what you hear from the other candidates. We will talk about real problems and how we'll deal with them. But as we do it, never become disillusioned or discouraged, and always remember how lucky we are to be in this great country, even if it has problems. Everybody all over the world would love to be where you are, but you and I are here. We own this country, even though it doesn't feel like it a lot of days. We do own this country. The people in Washington work for us under the Constitution. They are our servants. And I know you're thinking, if they're our servants, why are their retirement plans and health care plans much better than ours? That's because we let them get away with that, but we're going to fix that. Theirs should be no better than that of the average American. The problems we have to face and solve are insignificant compared to those that our ancestors who founded this country solved. That was a tough job. World War II was a tough job. All the other wars were tough jobs. This just means focusing, getting organized, and not allowing yourself to be manipulated by one-minute ads, and that's all the special interest money can buy is those ads to play with your mind. You feel so powerless because you say they have the money and all we have is the vote. Well, if you cast an informed vote and you vote your conscience, all the money in the world can't offset that. Please don't ever forget that. I'm here tonight, and I know you are too, because I love this country. I love the people in this country. I love the great principles on which this country was founded. And I don't like to see those principles violated. And today they are being grossly violated. And I am working night and day and have been for the last 5 years to put a stop to it. And we will. I'm going to give you several examples, just so you know exactly what we've got to deal with. Common Cause, one of our most respected citizens groups, has called for the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate criminal charges, and that's criminal in capital letters, leveled against both the political parties for the criminal misuse of millions of dollars in campaign funds. And nobody wants to talk about that during the campaign, but that should be page 1 on every newspaper in the country. And it is tonight. I've had a rich, full life, and I've seen a lot of things, but I never thought I would live long enough to see a convicted drug dealer invited to the White House. And I promise you this, if you elect me as your president, we will not be inviting drug dealers or people of that quality, or no quality, to the White House. Believe me. How did he get in? He gave $20,000 to the Democrats late in 1995. They bear hugged him at a big reception with Al Gore present down in Florida to thank him there. And then again, they invited him to the White House in December of 1995. This is a man who was then arrested again in January with 5,828 pounds of cocaine. Now you think of cocaine in the ounces. 5,828 5,828 pounds of cocaine in his possession. Every visitor to the White House is checked by the Secret Service. The White House had to know that this man had been arrested twice in the 1980s for drug dealing. They had to know he had ties to the Cali cartel, that's one of the major drug cartels, and they had to know that he had direct links to Fidel Castro. Now, you'd think Forrest Gump could have caught that guy going in the White House, right? Okay. Now then, I know and you know that the Secret Service caught him, and you know and I know that they let him in, and guess what? Mrs. Clinton and Vice President Gore posed for pictures with him in front of the White House Christmas tree. Makes you real proud, doesn't it? But now the White House, and until you understand this, you don't understand anything. They'll always spin anything that comes along, and here is the White House spin. The Secret Service says that it cannot, by law, inform the White House of someone coming in that has a criminal record, and that a criminal record does not preclude access to the White House. And if you believe that, I've got stuff in my attic that's been there for years I'd like to sell to you right after my speech. Okay. And now let's go to Mr. John Wong. He's an Indonesian businessman. He works for the Riadis. Now, Mr. Riadi and his wife gave nearly $200,000 to the Democrats during Bill Clinton's presidential campaign. His father is the head of the Lippo Group. This is a multi-billion-dollar Asian conglomerate. Last year, the New York Times ran a chart showing the most corrupt nations in the world, and guess who was ranked #1? Indonesia. Keep that in mind. This is a group that paid Webster Hubbell, who was Mrs. Clinton's boss at the law firm in Little Rock, who then went to the White House staff, who then committed criminal acts and has since been convicted and put in prison. But once he had to leave the White House and was on his way to prison, the Lippo Group paid him huge fees, and nobody knows why. What did they get in return? The Riadis flew 15 people from Indonesia for the presidential inauguration. I thought that was for the American people, didn't you? Then Mr. Riadi was one of a handful of foreigners to attend an exclusive inaugural party. He was the only foreign businessman given a prime seat at the economic conference hosted by our newly elected president in 1992 in Little Rock. Mr. John Wong, you ain't going to believe this, was given a position in the Clinton administration overseeing international trade and was given a top secret security clearance. Can you believe that? Well, those are the facts. And finally, when Mr. Wong left the Riadi family to come take this top secret job, the Riadis gave him a $780,000 severance going away present. You're going to see why he needed that much in a minute. A few months ago, he left the government to raise money full-time for the Democratic Party. He's done it with great success. He raised $250,000 from a Korean business. Los Angeles Times caught him, and they had to give the money back. Then, the details on this transaction are interesting. He got the money from John Lee, whose full name is Lee Kwang-hoon, who was invited to the Democratic Convention. He attended a dinner at the convention with Vice President Gore. This is special treatment. He gave $250,000 to the Democratic Convention through an American company that has no revenues in the United States, so it was a legal contribution. He also met President Clinton at a fundraising dinner in April after buying 5 seats at $50,000 apiece. In case you ever want to go to a dinner, that's a ticket. Mr. Lee has now dropped out of sight. His office in Korea has been vacated. Don't you wonder what Mr. Lee does for a living? Well, they finally figured it out. He works as a counselor to patients in Korea who have just had cosmetic surgery. I'm leaving the computer business tonight and going into a new field. I've obviously missed the areas of great financial opportunity, right? So Now then, Mr. Huang is still out there hard at work for the Democrats. Wouldn't you like to have somebody named O'Reilly out there hard to work for the Democrats? You know, so far we haven't found an American name. Anyhow, he set up a fundraiser in a Buddhist temple in Los Angeles. Now that's an interesting place to have a fundraiser, don't you think? All of the people who attended were monks and nuns who had sworn to a lifetime of poverty, but somehow they were able to give Al Gore personally, because he was there, $142,000. The nuns and monks later said Americans gave them the cash and told them to give it to the vice president. That is against the law. And that's the way it was done. Well, now then, how does the White House spend that one? And boy, are we gullible. Vice President Gore, I'm sure after hours of being briefed with the spinmeisters, came out and said, I thought it was a community outreach event. And I laughed. I said, it was. He was reaching out for money all night. Now, what do the Indonesians get in return? Indonesia's trade surplus has doubled with the United States since President Clinton has been in office. The Indonesians got to continue their brutal treatment of the East Timor area. And that is even though the president threatened sanctions and then mysteriously forgot to impose them. Now, Mr. Huang has been subpoenaed. Mr. Wong has been subpoenaed. He first, after hiding out, said, I will testify at 9 a.m. November the 6th. That's the day after election. But the federal judge said, no, you won't. You get in here and testify. He's testifying now. Then everybody tried to get him to suppress the videotapes, and the judge said, no, the lawyers can give them out. So we should hear a really interesting story in the next few days. And here's another one. I'm still in Asia. Pretty soon y'all are going to say, Ross, come home and tell us some local stories. According to the Los Angeles Times, two former Clinton White House appointees have been soliciting political contributions for the president in Taiwan. Their names are James Wood and Mark Middleton. Now that's two names you can relate to. This occurred while China was threatening Taiwan in 1995. Two Taiwan periodicals have reported this, that in August 1995, the Taiwan ruling party, their major political party, pledged $15 million to President Clinton. President Clinton sent an aircraft carrier group to protect Taiwan from China. Do you want a president who puts the lives of our armed forces at risk and manipulates foreign policy in exchange for $15 million in political contributions? All right. Let me say this. If you do, don't vote for me on November the 5th, because hell will freeze over before I do that. And now, we should have the orchestra back here playing Around the World in 80 Days, because now we go to Mr. Gandhi. Who is Mr. Gandhi and what does he do? Nobody knows, but one thing for sure is he gave $325,000 to this year's Democratic campaign. Well, where did he get the money? From a Japanese war criminal. It's going to make everybody real proud that fought in World War II, right? The same Mr. Gandhi owes the state of California $10,000 in back taxes that he can't pay, had his driver's license taken away from him because he couldn't pay his traffic fines. Mr. Gandhi doesn't have any money unless someone gives it to him. Obviously, all of this information about his contact with a war criminal and not having any money is available to the Secret Service. And yet, he showed up at the White House this year to personally give the President of the United States the Mahatma Gandhi Humanitarian Award. What an honor. But the question is he in any way tied or related to the Mahatma Gandhi family? The family says absolutely not. He is a fraud. Okay, well, we got the Secret Service busy now. Here's this man. We don't know much about him. He's going to give the humanitarian award. We check back here. He can't pay his bills. He's got traffic fines he can't pay. At least we can pull that out of the computer. We certainly ought to check who else has gotten the Mahatma Gandhi Award, right? From Mr. Gandhi. The Japanese war criminal also received the award. Did you ever think you'd see this in the White House? Okay. You thought you might see it on late night TV as a comedy, but not in the White House. And now the Lincoln bedroom in the White House. If you will give $100,000 to the Democrats, you can spend the night in the Lincoln bedroom. That offends me to my soul because working people, plumbers, electricians, people working third shift pay the full cost of the White House with their taxes. And if I am your president, you have my word, we will put a sign all across Washington, not for sale at any price. And now, we go to next is Mr. Van Hool. He is a Cuban national with a Spanish passport. He lives in Florida. He has a sugar empire worth $500 million. He has given $244,000 to the Republican Party. He is the vice chairman of Senator Dole's Finance Committee for this election. They gave another $44,000 to Democratic congressional elections. His PAC then gave $100,000 to both sides, so he covered his bet. And what did he get in return? $65 million a year in sugar subsidies championed by Senator Bob Dole. Now, wait just a minute. Wait just a minute. That is the bargain. We've got U.S. companies pragmatically giving $5 million a year and getting $500 million a year in subsidies from the U.S. government. Now, guess who pays for the $65 million and the $500 million? You do, because there is no money till you send taxes. And this is the reason all this increase in taxes over the years didn't produce a better life for the people. We've been subjected to numerous scandals and criminal investigations involving our president. A number of his friends and business associates, including a White House staff member, have been convicted. The president absolutely refuses to say whether or not he's going to pardon these friends and business associates right after he gets reelected, if he did, in 1996. Don't you think before we vote next Tuesday he should look you in the eye and either tell you he's going to or he won't? Is that asking too much? I feel very strongly about this. We have a funny phenomenon in our country. If some fellow who never graduated from high school steals a car, we're very comfortable with him going to jail for 10 years. But if someone who has a PhD degree robs 18 banks, we say, well, you know, it's kind of a shame he has to go to prison. Not in my mind. If you can't do the time, don't commit the crime. And I'll tell you this. Today we have special prosecutors investigating our president, his wife, and his business associates involved in these same matters. And we are headed directly toward a second Watergate in 1997. No ifs, ands, and buts. The last thing we need with all of our country's problems is to lose 2 years watching a variation of the O.J. trial on television while our government is frozen because our president is being investigated. Can we agree on that? I know this should be cleared up before we vote in '96. Do you want a person in the White House who will pardon convicted criminals? Let me ask you this. As I watch this day after day, our country has changed. What happened to our sense of decency? What happened to our sense of honor? Is there no sense of outrage anymore, no matter what the President of the United States does? I hope we can go back to the point where we hold our president to the highest moral and ethical standards, and if you elect me, I would expect you to do it. Most of you here were in scouting as boys and girls Is it too much to ask that we have a president who is honest, trustworthy, and loyal? I don't think so. Don't we want a president whose whole purpose in life is to serve the people and not the special interest? I pledge the American people that if you elect me, I will see that stealing your tax money is stopped, and that anybody who has or does commit criminal acts is punished, not pardoned. And all these pending criminal charges, if you elect me, will be properly and thoroughly investigated, and all those who are guilty will do time. Now, to show you how weird, when I go back, where's our sense of outrage? From one of our nation's leading newspapers, the New York Times, here is a half-page editorial endorsing President Clinton for re-election. But one-fourth of it, now stay with me, this goes back, one-fourth of it is basically saying, but you've got to clean up your moral and ethical standards for the second term. Let me give you some quotes. Many people do not trust him or believe him to be a person of character. The president should pledge not to pardon anyone convicted in prosecutions arising from Whitewater, the White House Travel Office firings, the mishandling of FBI files, or the raising of funds for the '96 campaign. He should promise that he, the First Lady, and every member of the executive branch will cooperate with all investigations, whether they're from the Justice Department, a special prosecutor, or a congressional committee. Read this editorial. They are basically asking this man to have a character and integrity change in midlife. That doesn't happen very often. The president pledged in his 1993 inaugural address to reform politics so that power and privilege no longer shout down the voice of the people. Now, there is no more important speech than your inaugural address. After promising us that in 1993, he then went on the circuit to the $50,000 a plate dinners, the $100,000 a couple dinners out in Hollywood, raising millions from those who have power and privilege. As you go to the polls, ask yourself whether or not you believe that he's going to start keeping his promises in 1997 after not keeping them for 4 years, from 92 to 96. And remember these words. This has been such an issue for 4 years. Finally, a reporter asked one of the senior White House staff members, says, does the president ever keep a promise? And here is the most beautiful spin I've heard in the last 4 years. Without missing a beat, the staffer says, the president keeps the promises he intends to keep. If you elect me your president and I promise you something, I will keep the promise, and if I don't, ask me to resign and I will. Now, why did I spend over 15 minutes on that? Because I want you to understand why the system doesn't work. You've got the two political parties who are bought and paid for by the special interests. The reason they are, there are a lot of good people in the parties, but it costs so much money to run. You get the money from the special interest, then after you win, you got to pay them back. And the only way to get the money to pay them back is to tap you on the shoulder as taxpayers, raise your taxes, and get the money. Now, that's created some interesting problems. I'm going to go through these problems pretty fast. We've got a very bright audience here tonight, and you can absorb the numbers as fast as I give them to you. Neither party will discuss these problems. They were never mentioned during the debates. They're not being mentioned in this campaign unless I am at the podium. And that's why they didn't want me at the podium in the debates. I put that little skunk up by the tail in '92, and they don't want it there again. Why don't they discuss the debt? Each party says, we didn't do it. The Republicans did it. The Republicans say, we didn't do it. The Democrats did it. I sit there and smile. They said there's nobody else around. They both did it. And that's the way it is. Now then, they can't face it. We're $5 trillion in debt. That's more debt than we have currency in print. And again, Forrest Gump can get it. That's too much debt, right? 70% of the debt is financed short term. That's like financing your house mortgage month to month. $3.5 trillion of the $5 trillion is short term. And that means when interest rates start going back up, and they will, the debt will increase $35 billion each year for each 1% interest rate increase. But that's the good news. The bad news, that in spite of what you heard in the debates, that they've got all this under control, go to the budget office, get their numbers, and you'll see that they forecast that the debt will be, now this is what I can't live with. They know this because these are their numbers, and yet they go on television and say, hey, we had the tax increase, it's all taken care of, live happily ever after. And by the way, we're going to cut your taxes. Man, if you believe that, I got stuff in the garage to sell you. Okay, but their numbers say that the debt will rise to $8 trillion by the year 2005, and the President's Office of Management and Budget says that in the year 2030, the debt will be increasing at the rate of $4.1 trillion each year. Now, it took 200 years to accumulate $5 trillion, and every year we're going to be accumulating 4/5 of that by the year 2030, according to your government. In addition, our government says that the cost of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security alone in the year 2030 will be $3.9 trillion. That's more than twice what we spend to run the country today. That the Social Security deficit in the year 2050 will be $5.5 trillion. Now I want you to all pretend you're fighter pilots flying supersonic and you're looking at the instrument panel and you figure out when to eject, okay? Okay. In the year 2060, our government forecasts that 40% of a worker's paycheck will be needed just to pay for Social Security. Everywhere I go, people stop me and say, Ross, what's wrong with Social Security? And I say, well, what do you think it is? I say, I send my check in every 2 weeks. My boss sends his check in every 2 weeks, goes into a retirement fund, they invest it, and I get it when I retire. And I said, well, you're partially right. Here's what really happens. You send your money in, the boss sends his money in, it hits the Treasury, and faster than Domino's can deliver pizza, it goes out to people who are retired. And they said, what about the Social Security Trust Fund they kept talking about during the debates? There's not one. There's no money in it. All there is a sheet of paper on the floor. They took all the money and spent it on other things to artificially reduce the deficit. You say, well, how did it ever work? I love that because they say, well, Ross, then how did it ever work? It worked great when they first put it in because life expectancy was 63 and you didn't get it till you were 65. Never worked better than it did then. Life expectancy went up. 1945, there were 40 people at work for every retired person. Worked great. 1950, it expanded benefits. There were only 16 people at work for every retired person. Still worked. Now we're down to 3.3 people at work for every retired person, and in the year 2020, we'll be down to 2 people at work for each retired person. You cannot keep pay-as-you-go. We will keep Social Security. We absolutely will protect the retired people, but we have got to transition from pay-as-you-go to a pension system, and the sooner we start that transition, the less painful it will be. Now, don't let anybody tell you anything else. You say, okay, Ross, I'm still not convinced we've got a financial problem. Then go to page, I love this one. Oh, no, I hate it. Page 25 of the President's 1995 budget, and our President forecast that a baby born after 1995, that'll be all the babies, most of these young people in medical school and here at this university are coming after at a later time. Our government forecasts that your children will pay an 82% tax rate. 82% tax rate. Now, they'll only keep 18 cents out of every dollar in their paycheck. If you need more proof, if you're still not convinced, go to page 18 of the President's 1997 budget. I'm sure we have some accountants here tonight, don't we? Students studying accounting. You know the formula. Assets minus liabilities equal net worth. Our government tells the American people in very fine, tedious print that the greatest nation in the history of man has a negative net worth of $2.98 trillion, and they left out $17 trillion of unfunded federal guarantees. And one time I said that, one of our nation's leading newspapers said, gee, Ross left out the Grand Canyon. Well, I didn't leave it out, they left it out. But let's assume you had it and you were trying to sell it to me. What would I do, farm it? I mean, it's vertical rock, you know. So, you know, if you bought it, you couldn't do much. I love that. But you take all the national parks and everything, and that doesn't offset the $17 trillion in guarantees. And that's just the way the government keeps books. They try to give us good news. Keep in mind, our government was in good shape when we went into the Depression. It was a positive force in getting us out. This time around, if we have a financial meltdown, and we will if we keep violating all the rules. In medical terms, if you drink too much too long, your liver will go. You don't know when. If you smoke too much too long, your lungs will go. You don't know when. And if you spend too much too long as a nation, you will go broke, but you don't know when. So what's the solution? Stop drinking, stop smoking, and stop overspending. That's the answer. Now, here is the problem. If we follow the first rule of human nature, and that's one of the primary reasons I'm on the trail, we follow the first primary rule of human nature, it's to keep things the way they are until after a crisis. If we let that crisis occur, millions of people will be devastated. It will take decades for our country to recover, and the world will be a much less stable place. We cannot, we must not, we will not let that happen. Now then, I love the people that say, Ross, hey man, this is human nature. We're spending too much money, but let's give big government a chance. Here's the record. You're not going to believe these numbers. In 1960, when John Kennedy became our president, we ran the greatest country in the world for $100 billion a year. That won't even begin to pay the interest on the debt every year now. That's $344 billion a year now. Just paying interest on the debt, and the debt doesn't buy anything for the American people. Excuse me, the interest doesn't buy anything for the American people. Our total national debt was $290 billion after nearly 200 years when John Kennedy took office. All the growth has taken place since then. Today, we spend $1.5 trillion a year, or 15 times as much as 1960. We have the $5 trillion debt. And all ordinary income taxes, young people listen to this, all ordinary income taxes collected west of the Mississippi River are needed just to pay interest on the debt. How'd you like to live in California? Realize you work night and day, you send your money in here, and it just pays interest on the debt. Now that line's moving east, and we got to stop it and move it back west and get it out of there. Surely, after spending all, let's assume you and I had spent this much money, we would have pure utopia, and our only problem would be to pay back the debt, right? So the American people should all have a castle on the hill, a yacht in Palm Beach, a Gulfstream at the airport, and a Rolls Royce in the garage, and all we have to do is pay the debt. Now, I have to make the case because I want you to know you didn't benefit from all this. These people I talked about in the first part of my speech did, but you did not. And here are the figures. Since 1980, the standard of living is down for 4 out of 5 working Americans. If you had a manufacturing job then, you were making $440 a week. If you're lucky enough to have one now, you're making $270 a week. Oh, during the debates, you heard about all these new jobs they'd created for us. God bless them, it's all going to be okay. They didn't tell you that they were minimum wage jobs. They didn't tell you that the top growth jobs were janitor, cleaner, cashier, secretary, and food preparation worker, which is a long way of saying fast food worker. None pay enough to support a family. Today's American workers net 20% less in real wages than in 1973, and today, after taxes, a man and a wife working together, their 2 paychecks, barely equal the purchasing power of 1 paycheck 25 years ago. Big government didn't work. In contrast now, to show you where it works, income is up 60% for the top 5% of the workforce and 137% for the top 1%. The old song, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and in the meantime, ain't we got fun? Well, it's not too much fun now, believe me. Surely this makes the point. Who got the money and who didn't? Big government, $5 trillion in debt, did not benefit the people. Now we got another deficit that we never talk about, because all of them promised you it was going to make you rich, and both parties joined at the hips, paid off by the big corporations, and rammed through all these stupid one-sided trade deals. I am for international trade, fair, balanced international trade. I'm not for stupid trade deals. Okay, so you don't have to wonder where I stand. Now, most people don't understand trade, but every time I say trade surplus, in the good old USA say, hot dog, that's wonderful. When I say we have a trade deficit, that's bad. That means we're buying goods from all over the world, our money's going out across the world, we're getting their goods that get less valuable every day. They've got our money, what used to be our money, they're investing it, They're getting rich, we're getting poor by the day. Our merchandise trade deficit this year is $174 billion. It's the largest of any nation in history. That's bad. Our cumulative trade deficit is over $1 trillion. Bad. But we do have some good news. We have a new #1 growth industry that dwarfs any other growth industry in our country. What is it? Microbiology or electronics? No, they're way down the line compared to this. The biggest growth industry in the United States of America is growth of government. And people stop me and say, well, Ross, what's the product? They smile and say, don't have one. Say, does it make a profit? And I said, no, it loses money. And they say, well, if it doesn't have a product, where do they get any money? And I smile and say, from the taxpayers. That's your #1 growth industry. Now, surely, again, all of us can figure out that is not a growth industry we want. A shrinking government would be a good sign, but having it as the #1 growth industry is not the answer. In our country, we now have more people working in government than we have working in manufacturing. Bad sign. For the cost to hire just one American worker, and please never forget these numbers, you can hire 47 Vietnamese workers, 50 Chinese workers, 37 Indonesian workers, 22 Filipino workers, 9 Mexican workers before peso devaluation. It's a bigger number than that now. These people, in addition to getting almost no pay, have no workers' rights, no health care, no Social Security, no retirement, and the companies, once they move across the border and go across the Rio Grande River, there's no pollution, no environmental controls. You pump it in the air, dump it in the river, and hallelujah. But these guys back in the United States, like Al Gore, that, you know, they're environmentalists to the core. I look at them and smile, and I said, have you thought about which way the wind blows from Mexico? The wind blows from the south. We're getting the pollution, they got the jobs. The Rio Grande River is the most polluted river in the world. You've heard the biblical phrase, walk on water. If you want to walk on water, you can do it across the Rio Grande River. It's that polluted. Now, did your government tell you that? No. China, have a big trade deficit with China. They now manufacture 2/3 of the world's shoes. You could fight barefooted again at Valley Forge. Half the world's toys. There's a tragic story yesterday in the Wall Street Journal first page about a young girl who left this little rural village and went into the factory with stars in her eyes where they make Barbie dolls. And after you read that story, you wouldn't let anybody in your family ever buy another Barbie doll, about how this child is abused in that factory. Please read it. Our trade deficit with China. Oh, and excuse me, now we have half the world's toys, most of the world's bicycles and power tools. High-tech manufacturing has increased in 60% in 1 year, so it's not all low-tech stuff. This year our trade deficit is $38 billion. That's bad. Next year it's going to be $50 billion. That's worse. Every other industrialized nation in the world has a trade surplus with China. I hope I've made my point. We don't know how to negotiate trade deals. And guess what? What does China do with all these dollars? They have now purchased $11.8 billion in U.S. Treasury notes and bonds. They're the world's 3rd largest holder of our securities. You and I, as we pay interest on the debt, are sending the interest to China. Makes you proud. Please, please understand, this gives China tremendous leverage over our country because any debtor is beholden to his creditor. I hope you see how it all fits together. It's complicated, but it does fit together. Then we get to NAFTA. That was sold to us. It's going to make us rich. Here are the facts. It's a disaster. I said it would be. I would rather not have been a prophet. I'd rather have been wrong, and nobody would have been hurt. Our trade deficit with Canada this year is $18 billion. Our merchandise trade deficit with Mexico is $15 billion. We had a trade surplus with Mexico when NAFTA was signed. The cumulative trade deficit is $70 billion, and companies from all over the world are putting their factories in Mexico, not in the USA, because for 1/10 of what you spend for a U.S. worker and you skip all the benefits, you've got 20 to 25% of the cost of your goods taken care of there, and you ship it across the border duty-free, and in the middle of the truck you load cocaine. And this is what breaks my heart. Mexico's biggest export to the United States is not included in any of the numbers I gave you. It's cocaine and illegal drugs, $120 billion a year coming into the United States. Now that is wrong. And guess what? The word from the White House down to the DEA is don't push them too hard. They need that money to stabilize the peso. If I am your president, we will never use a penny for drugs to stabilize a country's currency. And everything that can be done will be done to stamp out illegal drugs. And if you don't know why I feel so strongly, go to the neonatal units where the little crack babies are born. Spend 10 minutes there and see those little children permanently genetically damaged for life. The mother leaves after 3 days. The baby stays 42 days. The taxpayers pay $125,000. I'm back to hardworking people who never touch drugs. And the baby will be a permanent ward of the state. Now, to show you how touchy Washington is, when you do debates, there's a doctor from Boston University that says you can measure stress by how often a person blinks. Well, routinely during the debates, Bob Dole blinked 147 times a minute. Clinton blinked 99 times a minute. But when they brought up drug increases, like during his administration, teenage drug use on marijuana is up 141%, and average drug use, overall drug use, is up 100%. The blink rate went up to 117 times a minute. That's, caught him red-handed. Now, I don't know whether it's relevant or not, but my blink rate in the 1992 debate ranged from 7 to 11 times a minute. So if the guy's right, I don't blink a lot. You cannot be a superpower unless you're a manufacturing superpower and an economic superpower. There's a new Department of Defense manual that reflects our current government's thinking that every American must read. Now, for example, today in the New York Times, to tie it all together, there's a big story about an aircraft company in this country made a deal with Japan. They were going to build half the airplanes over there, half the airplanes back here, and we agreed to send them all kinds of very, very specialized equipment for airplane building. It turned out they didn't use it for airplane building. They're using it to build missiles to sell to third world countries. You can't be stupid enough to turn a dictatorship into a superpower by sending your jobs over there and sending your technology over there. I didn't think. But that's what we're doing today. Does anybody think that makes sense? Don't read it in the New York Times. Read an editorial a couple of days ago by A.M. Rosenthal saying, "Wake up, America." It is brilliantly written, and I'll give you a few quotes. He basically says, "Wake up, America. Wake up to the truth that Bob Dole and the Republican leadership are partners with President Clinton and the Democratic leadership in building up communist Chinese dictatorships in their armed forces." And then he goes on to say, "International investments become suicidal for the United States when they enrich military dictatorships that stand for everything democracy detests and fears." And he goes on and on and on. And now they come out with a Department of Defense booklet because I guess they figured out we're not going to make much here anymore. And they say, foreign dependence on goods does not make us vulnerable. I can't understand that. Foreign sources cannot be excluded from competition in order to protect classified or unique technologies or products. Using that logic, we should have Saddam Hussein make chemical, nuclear, and bacteriological weapons and send them to us, right? You wouldn't do that. Nobody with any sense would do that, and yet the DOD has this manual in print. Just because a foreign firm has control of a technology that's important to us, it does not make us vulnerable. Well, if we don't control it and it's important, we better figure out how to get control of it and make it here. And finally, I love this one. You've heard the Asian connection. You can't get further away than Asia, right? All the new factories are being built over there because of the cheap labor. Indonesia is the home of child labor. Brutal, repressive child labor. Starving children locked in factories. These are the people that the president is bound to the hip with that I told you all about at the beginning of my speech. He stands up and talks about children's rights and how he loves children. I don't care what a person says. I'm more interested in what they do, aren't you? And don't you find, just take, can you imagine in America, and particularly all of you who ever wore the uniform of the armed forces, that there would ever be a time when a procurement manual like this would be issued by the Defense Department, and that would not have been center stage in a presidential race. You never heard either party bring it up, right? Most people, had any of you here tonight ever heard of it before? As they say in the O.J. trial, I rest my case. Fine. Now, let me talk for a minute about the duties and responsibilities of Commander-in-Chief. Anybody you put in the White House, most serious and solemn duty is to protect and defend this country, and that person has the right to send the people you love the most in the world, your family, your children, your loved ones, into combat. Should you ever have a person in the White House that does not have the highest moral and ethical standards if you give him that responsibility? Fine. Every other presidential duty carries a lower priority. Keep in mind, war is fighting, bleeding, and dying. It is not a Super Bowl event. That's the way it's presented on television now, and boy, did we get excited on Desert Storm. 100-hour war brought to an end by a PR man. Now, anybody that's ever been in the uniform of the United States understands how stupid that was. And yet we, the people, are so gullible. We got all excited, and our heroes after that war were the president. He didn't go in combat. 90% approval rating. Generals in the Pentagon who never got shot at. And finally I said, where is Audie Murphy? Where is Sergeant York? Where are the real heroes from the battlefield? Nobody ever talked about them, right? That's how upside down we got it. War is spending your life in a VA hospital paralyzed from the neck down, or being a wonderful young woman with children who lives the rest of her life as a widow and the children grow up without a father. Nothing is more brutal than war, and as your president, if we have to go to war, now I promised you a war on drugs, but that's a different kind. But if we have to go to this kind of war, the first filter it'll have to get through is an easy one for me, and that is, relatively, would I die for this cause? Well, there's no point in thinking about sending your son if I wouldn't go. Now I'll go to the hard filter. Would I send my son or daughter to die for this cause? And hell will freeze over and look like a glacier before I will send your son and daughter if I wouldn't send my son and daughter. And I hope the fact I didn't send men into Iran to get my people out. I went in with them. I didn't send people into Vietnam and Laos at the request of the government. During the war, I went in with them. So I hope I've made the point. You need to understand this. If I'm your president and we have to go to war, I will require that every American sacrifice every day while our troops are on the battlefield. And our philosophy will be hit hard, hit fast, hit often, get it over with. We will use modern technology, unmanned weapons as much as we can to get the enemy to lose his will to fight. And when we have to put our troops at risk, my whole strategy will be hit hard, hit fast, hit often, get it over with. But I will not listen to some PR man that says, why don't we call it a 100-hour war? I'd say, wait a minute, we had objectives. We never think about that in this country. Our objectives in Kuwait, in Iraq, restore Kuwait to the Emir, get rid of Saddam Hussein, his nuclear, chemical, and bacteriological capability. All we did is take Kuwait back. We left everything else in place. And you say, where did he get his nuclear, chemical, and bacteriological capability? We sold it to him, or gave it to him, because we want him to use it against Iran. Now, you can't be that stupid, and believe me, I will follow Churchill's advice, never cozy up to tyrants, because that got us in a lot of trouble. So, in World War II, the sacrifice was easy. We rationed food, we rationed shoes, you couldn't buy a new car unless you were a doctor, so you guys are in the right profession here that invited me. Very few people could get a new car during the war, but all of that brought us together. In a little war, you can't do that, it just disturbs markets. I will impose a war tax on every American, and everybody's going to scream when I do it. And I'll say, fine, anybody that doesn't want to pay it can go get a rifle, go get a uniform, go into combat, because those folks will not be paying the war tax, just us back home. Now, why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I learned a brutal lesson in Vietnam, and that is, don't ever send our troops into combat unless you first commit the American people. That was the most wrong and rotten thing I've seen in my lifetime. you fight, bleed, and die just as hard as Vietnam as you did at Normandy Beach. Dead is dead in combat, right? Whether it's a one-day war or a big war like World War II, we will commit the nation, and then we will commit the truth. And finally, you have my absolute pledge that I will never forget the people who fought, and if you question that, look at my record for the past 30 years. It's there, carved in stone in terms of my help and support for wounded veterans. And the latest version is Desert Storm Syndrome. When nobody else would touch it, I spent a fortune on medical research. The findings are about to be published, and you know the results because you're starting to hear everybody in the Pentagon and the CIA start to admit it, right? I don't say that to get publicity for me. Let me make it very clear. The only reason I bring that up tonight, I want those men treated. And I know you do too. Okay, when you go to the polls next Tuesday, you got to make a decision who to vote on next Tuesday. I ask you to think about these things before you pull the lever or punch the button. If you were in a life or death situation and you could make only one call, which of the three candidates would you call that you think would come out and help you? If you were wounded on the battlefield, you're lying out there in no man's land, you only got 3 survivors in your platoon, they're the 3 candidates for president, who do you think is going to come out there and drag you back to safety? Vote for that person. Here's one for all the dads in the audience. Which of the 3 candidates would you be very comfortable having your daughter work for? Okay. Which, now then, and finally, if something happened to you and you had a bunch of little children in the house, which of those 3 people would you trust to really look after your family if they told you they would? Now, that's back to the characteristics your president should have. Now, I've got TV shows on Monday night. I want you to all watch them. It will be on ABC from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern, NBC from 8 to 8:30 Eastern, CBS from 8:30 to 9 p.m. Eastern. I hope you'll all tune in. Who is going to have to step forward and make this campaign a success? The people. But tonight, I call on the 6 million small business owners and the 80 million people who work there to come drive a stake in the ground on Tuesday, vote for the Reform Party, put me in office. Why do I want them? Because they are the backbone of our economy. They create most of the jobs. And when you've got 6 million small businesses, if you create an environment where businesses can grow and thrive, every time each one hires one person, you got 6 million new employees. 2 is 12 million, 3 is 18 million. You understand the math, I'm sure. Then I call on the 27.5 million veterans and your families one more time to go out on a mission, take your country back, give it to the people, vote for the Reform Party candidate, give us a chance to solve these problems. Now I go to the 50% of the people who are so disillusioned they won't even vote. I ask you to suit up, saddle up, and show up one time. Change the course of history in this country while there's still time to fix these problems. That'll do it. Now, to the young people here tonight, the 18 to 35-year-olds, I'm going to give you the most compelling reason of all. Your children are going to pay an 82% tax rate, and by the time they're up and working, you'll be approaching retirement. That means you'll be paying an 82% tax rate. Don't you think we ought to fix these problems now while they're manageable? I challenge the 18 to 35-year-olds to show up and vote for the Reform Party. Now, everybody that works for a living, that loves this country, ask yourselves, do you want to create jobs for the rest of the world, child labor around the world, or do you want to create jobs in the USA? If you want to create jobs in the USA, vote for me. That's my primary mission, because if we don't have those jobs, we won't have the taxes, we won't have the middle class, and this country will melt down. And finally, for every parent and grandparent who love your children and grandchildren, look in the mirror and say, what we've been doing is wrong. We've been spending their money. Our parents worked and sacrificed all their lives for us, and by golly, we're going to take whatever steps are necessary to leave our children a better, stronger country. Now just think, if those armies march out on the field on Tuesday, it will be the mother of all constitutional revolutions, right? Fine. And now in closing, I have a major announcement I want to make tonight. I have purchased 1 hour of television time on ABC from 8 to 9 p.m. on Monday, November the 4th, the night before election. I have been planning to use this time to explain our positions to the voters. But tonight, I want to offer President Clinton an opportunity to spend 1 hour with me, candidly discussing. Thank you. Thank you. Now, thank you very much. Thank you. Now, let's go back in the history of politics throughout the world. If you think this through, if you ever question my love and commitment for this country, 1 hour of network time cost $1 million. And if you can ever find anybody running a political campaign who offered to give that time to an opponent, I will be surprised. But the thing that matters is that we face the issues. I want to spend an hour candidly discussing with the President the criminal and ethical charges pending against him, his wife, his associates, and other members of his administration. Why do I want to do that? I don't want to be rude. I don't want to be rude or abusive, but I do want you to have the facts before you go to the polls the next day. Now, for example, let's assume someone stands up in the audience tonight and says, "Ross, you stole my car." My response would be, "No, I did not." I won't say, "Call me after November the 5th. Say, "Ross, you ran over my dog." "No, I did not." "You burned my house down." Absolutely, no, I did not. The point being, if somebody accuses you of something you never did, you should want to stand up and make it clear to the world that that is not true, right? Fine, okay. Now, I will ask the President of the United States to look the American people squarely in the eye over television and tell you whether or not he is going to pardon his friends and business associates after the election who already are convicted felons or may become convicted felons. I think you deserve that before the election, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. I want to you've heard my story about the Asian connections. You've heard my version that I've taken from all the reputable newspapers and magazines about the Asian manipulation. I want to give him an opportunity to explain it and explain why these huge fundraising efforts make sense from foreign countries, because they're illegal. They're criminal offenses. In addition, I want to give him an opportunity to answer the criminal charges raised by Common Cause on the misuse of millions of dollars of campaign funds. This will give him an opportunity to clear his name, set the record straight, and could assure him of a landslide if he will do it. Our country does not. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this for you because we don't have time to be distracted by a 2-year Watergate-type investigation. We don't need to have another president forced out of office. We need to carefully, thoughtfully, and rationally focus on our nation's problems in 1997 and start solving them. So I invite President Clinton to step forward and tell the voters the truth before they go to the polls on all these allegations made against him. I urge him to do this out of love for his country and his people. The American people deserve to know the truth. Surely, in closing, I have one thing to say before I make a very short closing statement, and that is, surely, in the White House, the standard set for the President of the United States should never be, is it legal or illegal? And if I'm your president, that will not be the standard. And it shouldn't be today. The only standard is it right or wrong? And that's the way we have to judge it. Everything I've said tonight I can sum up in these words. The budget should be balanced, the treasury should be refilled, the public debt should be reduced, and the arrogance of public officials must be controlled. Do you agree with that? Okay. Those are not my words. Those are not my words. Cicero spoke those words 2,000 years ago. I tell you that tonight to make you understand that human nature tends not to change. Human nature tends to wait till after a catastrophe results and then correct it, right? And finally, very briefly, let me tell you why I'm doing this. In 1979, I called an old friend, Colonel Arthur Simons, at 2 in the morning, legendary Special Forces hero when my people were in Iran, and asked him if he would lead the rescue to bring them out. It required tremendous risk. It required the largest prison break in the history of man, and then come out 540 miles over land. I'll never forget his reply. He said, "Yeah, I'll do it." I offered to pay him, and in very blunt words I won't repeat here tonight, he told me he would never take compensation for rescuing an American. That goes back to what's in here in a man, right? Because it'd be awful easy to say, "Yeah, Ross, I'll take your money." He took a team that he picked from my company, all Vietnam veterans, highly decorated. And to make a long story short, they executed Mission Impossible, brought them out 540 miles. I'll never forget when the two men were back at the Dallas airport hugging their wives and children. Colonel Simons punched me with his elbow and gave me a look that only Colonel Simons can give a person and said, "I just got paid for the trip." That's why he did it, to see them hug their wives and children again. Now I want you to understand, I am not running to be your president to live in the White House, but if I am there, we sure won't have drug dealers coming in and shady people, because that's your White House. And I am the tenant that you put there, and I will consider it a sacred responsibility. But that's not why I'm going. And I'm sure not going to run around in bulletproof limousines. I like to drive myself to work. I've always said when I get too old to drive myself to work, I'll quit going to work. Next, I'm not going to Washington to hear bands play Hail to the Chief and that kind of stuff. I'm going there for one reason, and that is to deal with these problems, to protect our children and grandchildren from them, and to make the 21st century the greatest in our country's history. But I'll tell you this, when we get it done, and we will get it done, I'll hit you with my elbow, look you squarely in the eye, and say, "I just got paid for the trip." Thank you very much. Great to be with you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, I know a lot of you have to go. Keep in mind, I was invited by the medical students tonight. They know I'm very close to medicine, and they said, "Tell us a couple of good stories." If you have 2 minutes, I'll tell you two that will bring tears to your eyes. It will tell you everything you need to know about this noble profession. The first, I got a call from a lady in Pennsylvania on a Sunday afternoon. My phone is unlisted. It was 3 weeks after Desert Storm. She was almost in tears. She said, "Mr. Perot," and oh, I love this. This AT&T operator said, "Mr. Perot, your phone number's unlisted, but you got to talk to this lady." Wham, she was on the line. Now, that's the way the world ought to be, too. Her husband was dying in Bahrain. He was with the Greensburg, Pennsylvania National Guard unit that was hit with a Scud missile. She had been talking to his doctor over the telephone. That's a different world than when I was in the military. Enlisted men's wives couldn't talk to a doctor halfway around the world. But in today's Navy, they could. In today's military, it was a Navy doctor, Dr. Wallace. And she said, "My daughters and I want to see our husband and father before he dies, and the doctor says he's going to die." And then she gave me all kind of details. I said, "How do you know so much?" She said, "I'm talking to him over the phone." I said, "Do you mind if I talk to your doctor? We'll get the tickets and get you on the way, but the real challenge is to try to save your husband." She gave me his name and number, and in today's world, I dialed him direct in Bahrain, believe it or not, just like I might call you. He was on the phone. Now, this says so much about the man. Boy, would I love to have a man with this character in the White House. He said, "Ross, I can't save Sergeant Campbell, but the right doctors could." Now, there's an honest man, right? No ego, just focus on the patient. And I said, "I happen to know a Dr. Weigelt who's the top trauma doctor in the United States. If I can find him at home, can I have him call you?" He says, "Yes." Every now and then you get lucky. Dr. Weigelt was at home. He called him immediately. He called me back in 10 minutes and said, "Now, think of this. Top trauma doctor in the United States." He said, "My team and I will leave immediately, but he'll be dead when we get there." So that's the bad news. He said, here's the good news, Ross. I have 3 friends who are genius doctors who are called up for Desert Storm. They're somewhere over there. I don't know where they are. But if you find those guys, they'll save him. This is all done over the phone so far. So then I called the National Command Center at the Pentagon. There's a general or admiral on duty all the time. I talked to an Admiral Robertson. I'll never forget it. He never said a word. I gave him the 3 doctors' names that we needed. I told him we didn't know what branch of the service they were in. I gave him all the details, Dr. Wallace, his numbers, so on and so forth. Never said a word. When I finished, said, Ross, don't worry, I'll take care of it. 3 hours later, keep in mind, this is halfway around the world. Dr. Weigelt called me at home laughing. He says, Pro, you're not going to believe this, but the 3 genius doctors showed up. The sergeant has been stabilized. He will live. Now that's what medicine is all about. Now then, I'll have to tell you the rest of the story. We had a big celebration welcoming guys home from Desert Storm in Dallas. I was asked to be in charge of it. I wasn't about to have a parade without having Dr. Wallace there. And I wanted the Campbells to be with him because he had the courage to say, I can't do it, but the right team could. This tells you everything else you'd want to know about Dr. Wallace. He called me and said, Ross, in good conscience, I cannot attend that parade unless the nursing team that was with me comes too, because without them, we couldn't have saved him. And so he insisted that his whole team be honored at the parade. Now, wouldn't it be neat if the White House worked this way? Wouldn't it be neat if society worked this way? And I'll tell you one more story. I had a young lady working for me. She came in crying one day. She said, my sister is dying of a brain tumor. She's got little children. There's nothing anybody can do. And I'm just destroyed. And she wanted to know if she could take time off to be with her till she died. And I said, yes, but the challenge is to see if we can save her. Get the MRIs, get the x-rays, and let's take another look. Sent them over to these genius doctors, and they called back and said, it's not a brain tumor. This is Duke Sampson, who is a legendary trauma neurosurgeon. He called back and said, Ross, it is the worst aneurysm. That means an expanded blood vessel. Said, it looks like a tumor, but it's an aneurysm. He said, you get that girl in here quick because it's going to explode, but if I can get her before it explodes, we'll save her. To make a long story short, that was 9 days before Mother's Day. This girl was getting up every day thinking, I'll never see my children again. She came over. Duke Sampson operated on her. She was back at home and up and around with her children on Mother's Day. Now, can you think of any more satisfying profession that you could be in? And one last one, a West Pointer in Panama. Imagine, somebody just like you, great college graduate, great record, no hands, stubs, one eye gone, eardrums gone, midsection damaged, and 6 months after Panama, they were going to take his leg because they couldn't cure the bone infection. 4-star general called me from the Pentagon and said, Ross, is there anybody out there that could save this guy's leg? It just breaks my heart. Now, isn't it neat that generals care for sergeants and lieutenants and what have you? So, to make a long story short, there's a doctor in Emory University, Dr. Cierney. He's the leading authority on bone infection. He agreed to see him immediately. He saved his leg. Months went by. I never got a bill. I called him. I said, Dr. Cierney, you never billed me. He said, Ross, I will never bill you. That was a privilege to save that man's leg. Now, isn't that a noble profession? Now, it gets better. There was a great, I asked who the leading hand surgeon is because this young man could no longer write. And they identified him. And I called, and they said, Ross, he's a real character. He may talk to God every other Tuesday, but if this guy, you can get him on the phone and get him to do it. He's the one to do it. Probably he won't do it. One of his associates will do it. But your real challenge will be to get him on the phone. I left a message with his nurse. 2 minutes later, he called back. I asked him if he would see the captain with no hands. And in language I won't repeat, he told me if I would quit talking about it and get the guy down there, he would see him. And I said, now, I understand you're very busy, doctor. Will you operate on him or will it be someone else? And I got about 10 minutes of rough language telling me that nobody would ever touch this guy but him. And then he took parts of his toes and restored his ability to write. They later rebuilt his eardrums. It was just incredible what doctors could do. But then I never got a bill from the hand surgeon. And this is a guy that you wait for months to see. So I called him. I said, Doctor, you forgot to bill me. And I got about 20 minutes worth of words I will not repeat telling me how long I would have to wait to get a bill. Now, yours is a noble profession. Always put the patient first. And during this period where our government is just floundering around, I have made an open appeal to the medical profession to get organized, and for a little bit of time, don't just totally focus on curing patients, but think about what the ideal healthcare system for the patient would be in the 21st century. Because if I ever build an office building, I'm going to get architects, right? Using the White House approach, I'd get a beekeeper that's very brilliant to design the office building, not an architect. You've got to get people who understand how to solve the problem to do it. I would love to see the doctors come up with the ideal medical plan for the patient in the 21st century and explain it to us in great detail, and I have a feeling that would be so much better than anything Washington could ever even think about, that we would have a meltdown. And if I'm your president, you say, how am I going to shut down the special interest? Every time we have to do new redesign, re-engineer programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, we are going to redesign and re-engineer them, and they've never done it before. Noble dream, massive legislation, no detailed plans, no pilot testing, no optimizing, no debugging, nationwide implementation with no testing, guaranteed failure and cost overruns and tax increases. That's the reason they don't work. We're going to carefully put them all together, and then we're going to bring them to you after we've pilot tested them. You can go out and see those programs in operation. And then in print and on television, we're going to explain them to you like adults. And I hope you feel like I have talked to you like adults tonight and not run around with little city-pully phrases. But the point being, we're going to explain it to you in detail. And then we're going to have a national referendum. And you, not the special interests, will decide what the new health care program will be. Now, everybody in Washington thinks that's the dumbest idea in the world. And I laugh at them. I said, in business, the customer is king. The American voters and the taxpayers are our customers. They are king. We are their servants, and these programs are for them. They should have the voice in whether or not they like them. They should have the voice in terms of whether or not they're affordable, because they're going to have to pay for them. And now then, on taxes. We will have a new tax system. The IRS system's archaic. We won't lunge off it in a swimming pool with no water in it at night, screaming flat tax and so on and so on. We will take the computer and analyze all the different options. We will tell you what all the different options are, what they will cost you as a taxpayer based on your salary. Then I will come to the taxpayers, and we will reach a consensus through referendums about what it should be. But the new tax system, whatever it is going to have a big hook in it that is absolutely essential. And that is, any time Washington wants to raise your taxes, we are going to put it on the ballot in the next federal election, not a referendum. I want that on the ballot when the president's running, when the House is running, and a third of the Senate is running. They say they feel our pain. They will feel our pain when they put a tax increase on the ballot. But, then again, they go crazy. They say, why should the people have a final voice? I said, number one, it's their country. Number two, it's their money. They should have the final voice. And number three, we're so guilty of irresponsible spending in Washington, we've got to put control around spending. I will close with this and give you the history of the tax system, and this will keep you up tonight. We fought and won the revolution with every person paying 67.5 cents a year. You could live with that, couldn't you? We became a nation and it went up to $1. 120 years later, in 1910, we were spending $6.75 per person per year. Then in 1913, we passed the federal income tax law, and in the next 16 years, by 1929, it had gone from $6.75 to $29. You see something happening here? The rates keep going up, right? Now it's $5,700 a year. The standard of living is down for 4 out of 5 Americans. It's not working. And we obviously have to redesign, re-engineer all of this and do it in a careful, thoughtful, rational way. And anybody that has a 3-second plan on how to do any of these things, don't listen to. Redesigning and re-engineering Medicare is more complex than putting a man on the moon. That follows the laws of physics. Medicare has millions of complex interrelated parts. We can do it, and we will do it, but you have to go through the design and engineering and testing phases in order to make it work. Now, if that kind of thinking makes sense to you, I will give you every moment of my life, as I have for the last 5 years, to get it done for our children and grandchildren. Because I'm probably the most blessed man in this country, in terms of the parents I had. We were very modest in the Depression, but I was rich because of my mother and dad from birth. My wonderful wife, I met her on a blind date. You can't get luckier than that. I got into the Naval Academy by luck. You can't be luckier than that. I got my job with IBM by luck. And I had no idea when I started my company that it would grow to 95,000 employees and have revenues of $12.4 billion a year. Now keep in mind, to put it in perspective, if you don't understand what drives me, right in my office, right across from my desk, is a picture of my dad in his little cotton office. He didn't get to finish high school because his dad died and he dropped out of high school to look after his mother. That's old America, right? He worked as a Texas cowboy. He became a cotton broker. He had a little wooden office that you would call a shack. I helped him build it when I was a boy. And hanging right behind his desk in that picture is his general ledger hanging from a nail on the wall. Only in America would that man's son have the opportunity to start a company from a dream and have it grow into a worldwide network of computers linked together by satellite processing financial information for large companies. Now that's the American dream, right? I have lived it. And the most important part, forget the financial success compared to Margot and my children and my 10 grandchildren. You know, I have 10 great children and 10 perfect grandchildren. If you're grandparents, you understand what I'm saying. I could not live with myself unless we passed on a better, stronger country to them. I want to spend a very respectful, thoughtful hour with the President of the United States. I want to give him every chance to make it clear to you that none of these charges are true. Or if they are true, to admit to you that they are true. So that when you go to the polls, you know whether or not you can consider a candidate based on his character and integrity. Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be with you. Great to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.